Right now, as we speak, Congress can pass a law that would prevent a tax hike on the first $250,000 of everybody's income. So we really need to get this right. I can only do it with the help of the American people. So tweet, what was that again? My2K. Do what it takes to communicate a sense of urgency. We don't have a lot of time here.
In order to try to come to an agreement, Republicans are willing to put revenue on the table, but it's time for the president and Democrats to get serious about the spending problem that our country has.
Well, some of the back and forth today, and the president calling on people to get involved, including on Twitter. This as he met this morning with unions and other liberal organizations to discuss the fiscal cliff. And here's how the Washington Post characterized that meeting and some of the groups there. One person at the meeting, which included people from the AFL-CIO, AFSCME, SEIU, Move On, and others, came away convinced that the White House would ultimately prove willing to go over the fiscal cliff if necessary rather than give ground on core demands, though this is not by any means a desired option and isn't being discussed as a strategic possibility. What was discussed today, however, was decoupling the spending cuts and the tax increases. The president talked about it, so did Jay Carney at the White House.
I think we have to have substantive, real entitlement reform. That's got to be as much a part of a discussion as taxes have been. And I stressed that yesterday in the White House, and I'll stress it today here. If we go over the cliff, you're going to have, a slowdown in economic growth of at least 4%. That puts us back into recession. That means 2 million people lose their job. It means unemployment goes to 9%.
Okay, so he's talking about it, but very few others are. Entitlement reform, that is.
Look, Obama has never offered anything in public about entitlements. He always says he wants a discussion, and now he says after the Republicans give up their one issue on taxes, I'll discuss a bargain next year. Of course he wants that, because that'll be at a time when Republicans are defrocked, disrobed, and disarmed. They will have nothing to bargain with. Look, the Republicans started out, as Steve indicated, by offering a peace pipe, by saying we'll raise the revenues. And they just had a punch in the nose this afternoon. Any Republican who buys this is a fool. The Republicans have stood for one thing consistently. It's held them together ideologically, and generally speaking, it's helped them electorally. They are the low-tax party. The other guys want a tax to match their reckless spending. If they give it up now in return for nothing, Obama wins, and he wins big. Now, I understand why the Democrats are doing this. They imagine that Republicans have no bargaining power today. I say it's true that if Republicans resist, they'll take the blame, and that will help Democrats in the Congress. But Obama's never running again. He doesn't care who gets the blame. He's going to be the president. He's a lame duck. He wants a successful second term. If it starts by going over the cliff, it starts with a second recession, 2 million unemployed, and a wrecked second term. That's the leverage that Republicans have over Obama, and they ought to use it and not cave in the face of a demand that I think is utterly unacceptable.
What Charles is saying, it's a peace pipe. It's not really a peace pipe. It's that they realize they don't have any cards to play. So they're caving. That's what's happening. And now they're going to move on to entitlements, and they can put this stuff on the table. And I think the president probably is open to means testings and those types of things. So, but we're guessing. But to suggest that the Republicans are doing all this stuff that they're not doing. I mean,
the Republicans have one card. If we go over the cliff, Obama will have a failed second term. And that's the one thing he cares about, and he's in charge. The idea that Republicans are here empty-handed is a huge mistake. If they assume it's so, they're going to cave, and they will undermine their entire stance as the low-tax party for a generation. They're going to lose that issue. The same way that George Bush Sr., he made a promise on taxes, he went against it, it destroyed his career.
The filibuster is far from a procedural gimmick. It's part of the fabric of this institution we call the Senate. It was well known in colonial legislatures before we became a country, and it's an integral part of our country's 214-year history.
This nuclear option is ultimately an example of the arrogance of power. It is a fundamental power grab by the majority party.
The checks and balances that Americans prize are at stake. I will do everything I can to prevent the nuclear option from being invoked, not for the sake of myself or my party, but for the sake of this great republic and its traditions.
Everyone in this chamber knows that if the majority chooses to end the filibuster, if they choose to change the rules and put an end to democratic debate, then the fighting and the bitterness and the gridlock will only get worse.
Well, some top Democrats talking about the nuclear option, ending the filibuster. That would allow the majority to end filibusters, defeat amendments by a simple majority vote, not the 60 votes needed in the Senate right now, the 3/5 threshold under Senate rules for major legislation for more than 30 years, as you saw there. That was their take back then. But now Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid is moving forward with a number of Democrats to make adjustments. Here's what he says they are.
These minor changes that I'm suggesting wouldn't affect anyone that had the thought of making America better if I were in the minority. To stop a filibuster on a motion to proceed to a bill, take 10 days to just get on a bill, I don't think that's good, and we need to change.
Charles.
I love these debates because, I mean, of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, this issue is the one that brings out the purest hypocrisy. It's like a laboratory sample of it. And you hear the same arguments, but different teams argue it, depending on who's the majority.
And emotionally.
Oh, emotionally. And, you know, with great grandiloquence and how much the Republic hangs on this, and then 6 years later, you're saying the exact opposite with the same fervor and passion. So it's obviously a joke. It depends who's in power. In 2005, I think, is when those clips were, the Republicans were in charge. The Democrats were stopping the appointment of the judges, including Miguel Estrada, who's a promising, rising Hispanic who probably would have ended up on the Supreme Court. And in the end, the Republicans threatened and got a kind of a compromise. Look, I could live with it or without it. But, I mean, I do think it is just highly amusing and entertaining that you get all the thundering arguments on either side. I think we ought to have, you know, Simpson and Bowles, get them in a room and decide how we're going to do this for like 50 years, depending on who's going to be. And it can be a yes or a no. I think the Republic will survive either way. I link this with the president's approach today, where he essentially said to the Republicans on taxes, you give me everything, I give you nothing, we go over a cliff otherwise. I think this is an assault by Democrats on Republicans, and Democrats have an idea that having just won what they imagine is a landslide, they're going to push this on all the fronts, in the Congress and on taxation. I think it's a big mistake.
This has been a Sunfish production.